Hello again. Some people of my generation are a little cynical about climate change, even though we are assured that the science is settled. The expression "the science is settled," by the way, always um, triggers something of an alarm in me because science is never really settled. There are always questions to be asked. And if once you think that the science on some subject is settled, then you've got a very strange worldview. The reason that older people are sometimes not as enthusiastic about global warming as youngsters are is that we remember when the science was settled in quite the opposite direction. I know that I've talked about this before, but with Britain and America both seemingly determined to bankrupt themselves and destroy their economies in a vain attempt to prevent carbon dioxide emissions growing, I thought it might be amusing to revisit the topic. One of the great advantages of relying on books for information is that they cannot be tampered with or cast into the memory hole, as happens often with information on the internet. Here's a book from 1975. It's a Reader's Digest book, essentially a popular account of science at that time, together with a lot of interesting historical anecdotes as well. The context for that book is that throughout the 1960s, it seemed to be almost certain that the climate of the world was cooling. The winters were getting colder and the summers were cold and damp. A number of science fiction novels used the theme of another ice age coming. Here's a couple of them. This one, Robert Silverberg, Time of the Great Freeze, was published in 1964, and that's about the aftermath of an ice age. And this one, The World in Winter, was published in 1962, and it's about the onset of an ice age and how it affects Europe. It was quite the bestseller at the time because, of course, 1962, the year it was published, saw the worst winter for centuries in Britain. By the time that this piece in the Reader's Digest book was published, it was an accepted fact that the Earth was cooling. Let me read some of it, just out of interest. Right, are you ready? Records going back to the 14th century show that the northern hemisphere has been cooling gradually, producing more severe winters. Note that they're looking at records going back to the medieval period, precisely the same records that now show that the world is getting hotter. Since 1940, Britain has experienced 5 winters with a whole month averaging below freezing point, while there were none between 1896 and 1939. The winter of 1962-3 was the worst since 1740. And of course, that's quite true. In 1962, the snow fell on Boxing Day and it lay on the ground over much of Europe until Easter. Some people really did think it was the onset of the Ice Age. The thumbnail to this video, by the way, shows some people trudging through a snowy city on skis. That's actually Barcelona in 1962. The whole of Europe, even hot countries like Barcelona and Portugal, were blanketed in snow. It was an extraordinary time. Even a small drop in average temperatures, as little as a degree in some places, could put an end to cereal growing in northern areas. Right, that's interesting because just as we're told today that climate change is going to affect agriculture, so it was in 1975. The difference was it was the cold weather that was going to harm the agriculture and start making the world starve. Marine biologists stationed at Plymouth say that increasing numbers of cold water fish, such as cod, ling and lemon sole, are already invading the sea around Devon and Cornwall. Again, this is interesting because we're often told that today that fish and animals that are more suited to warm waters are moving north, and that we're likely to see some exotic tropical animals and fishes around the shores of Britain. It was precisely the opposite in 1975. They were expecting lots of cold water fish to arrive. Mankind's own activities may even be hastening the return of the ice. The millions of tons of dust that pour into the atmosphere from factory chimneys all over the world prevent sunlight getting through and so make the planet colder. Do you see now, just as today we think that industry and pollution is causing global warming, industry and pollution was doing precisely the opposite in 1975. Instead of making the planet warmer, it's making it colder. If the spread of pollutants is not checked, the Earth may cool by 3.5 degrees centigrade within 50 years. Again, very similar to the sort of predictions now, except that it's going to cool by 3.5 degrees rather than increase by 3.5 degrees. This could set off a steady growth in the polar ice caps. Can anything be done to stave off a new ice age? One possible method would be to spread vast areas of black plastic over the creeping glaciers or scatter millions of tons of coal dust on them. The black material would absorb more of the sun's heat and melt the ice. Again, we're seeing schemes today to combat global warming. There was recently a suggestion that if we started dumping iron filings in the ocean, it would feed the plankton there, and that they would start increasing in numbers and absorbing carbon dioxide. In 1975, it was the zenith of the fears over the Ice Age. The year that book was published, something really extraordinary happened. It snowed in England in June. On June the 4th, a county cricket match between Derbyshire and Lancashire that was held in Buxton in the north of England had to be abandoned due to snow which settled an inch thick. Cricket was disrupted at Colchester as well when Essex was playing Kent. There was even snow in London. All the evidence was in, and by 1975 it seemed absolutely certain that the Ice Age was just round the corner. And then suddenly things changed. All that evidence dating back to the 14th century that they mention here suddenly showed the absolute opposite. And the reason's very simple. After 1975 there was a run of fairly decent summers, and that made people think that the Ice Age wasn't coming after all. In fact, there was some really warm weather. I'm sure some people remember 1976, the year of the drought in England. That was a year following 75 when we had the snow in June. And suddenly it all looked much more optimistic. There's no Ice Age on the way. Quite the opposite. Now we've got to worry that it's going to get too hot instead. This was an absolutely marvellous turnabout, but it's one which most young people don't even know about.